Indonesia entered a new chapter in October 2024. Prabowo Subianto, a figure long familiar in Indonesian politics, assumed the presidency. This victory followed two unsuccessful attempts against Joko Widodo, known as Jokowi. Jokowi, having served 2 terms, was constitutionally barred from seeking re-election. However, his presence loomed large over the election and Prabowo's victory. Many observers believed that Jokowi had thrown his support behind his former rival. This unexpected alliance raised eyebrows and sparked debate about the future of Indonesian democracy. The relationship between Jokowi and Prabowo had long been marked by rivalry. They faced off in the 2014 and 2019 presidential elections. Prabowo's defeat in 2019 was particularly contentious. He challenged the results, alleging widespread fraud. The Constitutional Court ultimately upheld Jokowi's victory. Despite this history of competition, the two men appeared to reconcile during Jokowi's second term. Prabowo joined Jokowi's cabinet in 2019, signaling a shift in their dynamic. This reconciliation paved the way for Prabowo's eventual victory in 2024. Jokowi's endorsement carried significant weight. He remained popular throughout his presidency. Many Indonesians credited him with economic growth and infrastructure development. His support provided Prabowo with legitimacy and access to a vast political network. However, this alliance also raised concerns about Jokowi's intentions. Some analysts speculated that Jokowi's support for Prabowo was a calculated move. They argued that Jokowi aimed to maintain his influence even after leaving office. By backing Prabowo, he could potentially safeguard his legacy and protect his family's interests. Others suggested that Jokowi genuinely believed that Prabowo was the best candidate to succeed him. Regardless of Jokowi's motivations, his influence on Prabowo's rise to power was undeniable. To understand the significance of Prabowo's presidency, it is essential to examine the legacy of his predecessor. Jokowi came to power in 2014 promising change and reform. He presented himself as a man of the people, a stark contrast to the political elite that had long dominated Indonesia. His early years in office were marked by optimism and hope. He initiated ambitious infrastructure projects, expanded social welfare programs, and pledged to strengthen democratic institutions. However, as Jokowi's presidency progressed, concerns emerged about his commitment to democratic principles. Critics argued that he increasingly relied on coercion and patronage to maintain power. They pointed to the growing influence of the military and police in civilian affairs. Freedom of speech and assembly came under threat, with journalists and activists facing intimidation and harassment. Jokowi's administration also faced accusations of corruption and cronyism, tarnishing his image as a reformer. One of the most significant criticisms leveled against Jokowi was his handling of dissent. His government displayed little tolerance for opposition, particularly from Islamist groups. Protests were often met with excessive force, raising concerns about human rights violations. Jokowi's approach to dissent fueled anxieties about the erosion of democratic space in Indonesia. By the end of his second term, Jokowi's legacy was a complex one. He had undoubtedly achieved significant progress in areas such as infrastructure development and economic growth. However, his tenure was also marked by a decline in democratic norms and a shrinking space for dissent. This legacy would cast a long shadow over Prabowo's presidency. The 2024 Indonesian presidential election was a closely watched affair. The contest between Prabowo Subianto and his main rival, a prominent opposition figure, was fiercely contested. The campaign was marred by accusations of smear campaigns, misinformation, and voter intimidation. International observers raised concerns about the fairness and transparency of the electoral process. Despite these concerns, Prabowo emerged victorious, albeit with a narrow margin. Adding to the controversy was the selection of Jokowi's son, Gibran Rakabuming Raka, as Prabowo's running mate. Gibran at the time was the mayor of Solo, a city in central Java. His sudden rise to national prominence fueled speculation about dynastic politics and the consolidation of power within a select few families. Critics argued that Gibran's selection was a blatant attempt by Jokowi to maintain his grip on power even after leaving office. Gibran's candidacy also faced legal challenges. Opponents argued that he did not meet the minimum age requirement to serve as vice president. However, the Constitutional Court, seen by many as being under Jokowi's influence, ruled in Gibran's favor, paving the way for him to join the presidential ticket. This decision further eroded public trust in Indonesia's democratic institutions. The maneuvering surrounding Gibran's vice presidential candidacy exemplified the blurring of lines between family, politics, and power in Indonesia. It raised uncomfortable questions about the future of Indonesian democracy. Many feared that Prabowo's presidency, with Jokowi's son as his deputy, would further consolidate power within a small circle of elites, undermining accountability and transparency. Prabowo Subianto inherited a nation grappling with a complex set of challenges. The economy, while showing signs of growth, faced headwinds from global uncertainty and rising inflation. Social inequality remained a persistent issue, with a widening gap between the rich and the poor. Climate change posed an existential threat to the Indonesian archipelago, with rising sea levels and extreme weather events becoming increasingly common. Prabowo's cabinet appointments were scrutinized for insights into his policy direction. The inclusion of numerous figures from the Jokowi era suggested a degree of continuity. However, the presence of several retired military generals raised concerns about the growing influence of the security apparatus in civilian governance. Prabowo's own background as a former military general, with alleged links to human rights abuses in the past, fueled these anxieties. One of the most pressing questions facing Prabowo was how he would address the democratic backsliding that occurred under his predecessor. Would he take steps to restore public trust in institutions, strengthen the rule of law, and protect civil liberties? Or would he continue down the path of consolidating power and curtailing dissent? The early days of his presidency offered few clear answers. The international community watched Prabowo's presidency with a mix of hope and apprehension. Indonesia, as the world's third-largest democracy and a key player in Southeast Asia, held significant geopolitical weight. A stable and democratic Indonesia was crucial for regional security and prosperity. However, a backsliding Indonesia, one marked by authoritarianism and instability, could have far-reaching consequences. Only time would tell which path Prabowo's Indonesia would take. The stakes were high not just for Indonesia but for the region and the world.